Good morning. Welcome back to I Survived Mount St. Helens. And we last left them, they met that Dr. Morales, and the doctor was telling them the history of Mount St. Helens. So they were also talking about Mount St. Pierre in Martinique in the Caribbean. So, chapter 9. Jess couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined St. Helens exploding, and then a flaming wind sweeping down the mountain. Finally, she took her quilt and went into her mom's room. Mom was awake too and moved over in bed to make space for Jess. "Don't be worried," Mom said. "You heard what Dr. Morales said. We're safe here in Cedar." "I know, but I can't stop thinking about it." "I can't either," Mom said. "But I think we need to put it out of our minds. Maybe Dr. Morales has just watched too many disaster movies." Jess smiled. "That part about the snakes was a bit much." Mom giggled a little. "But do you really think St. Helens is going to erupt?" Jess asked. "Could that actually happen?" Mom turned toward Jess. She moved closer so their noses were almost touching. "Whatever happens, you and I will make it through, like we always have, and like we always will." Mom said the words without a shred of doubt. Jess looked at Mom. She still needed to tell her about the camera, though. But suddenly, Jess was so tired. She closed her eyes, and with Mom's calming words whispering through her mind, Jess fell asleep. The next morning, Jess and Mom had barely finished breakfast when the twins came barging through their door. "We're in the newspaper," Sam cried. "You are?" Jess said with surprise. "Not us," Eddie cried. "St. Helens." They held up the Seattle paper with a headline screaming out from the front page. "Mount St. Helens awakes." Jess couldn't believe that their mountain was on the front page of an important newspaper like the Times. At school that day, their teacher, Mr. Daly, canceled their fractions quiz. Instead, he gave them a lesson about volcanoes. He explained that the Earth was like a big ball of candy with different layers. The outer shell was the crust, and it was about 18 miles thick. Underneath was an ocean of fiery molten rock. In some spots, there were cracks in the crust, and that's where volcanoes formed. Jess was shocked to learn that there were 1,500 volcanoes around the world that could be active, and 14 of them were right in the Cascades. How did she not know any of this? None of the kids in the class knew. On the blacktop, nobody wanted to play kickball. They all nervously eyed the mountain, which rose up in the distance. Kids gathered around as Sam repeated Dr. Morales' story of Mount Pelée. He explained about the warning signs, the rotten egg stench of sulfur gas, the mudslides, and of course the pit vipers. He told them about the fiery hurricane wind that swept down the mountain. The kids listened with wide eyes and slack jaws. This story was way better than the legend of the skeleton woman. On Tuesday, Missy saw a garter snake slithering through the grass behind the blacktop. "It's a pit viper!" she shrieked. Other kids freaked out too. It took Mr. Daly the rest of recess to calm them down and to convince them that there were no pit vipers in Washington State, or anywhere else in the United States. Over the next few days, the police set up roadblocks on Spirit Lake Memorial Highway. They wouldn't let anyone within 10 miles of the mountain, not even loggers. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, on Friday, something did. It was near the end of the school day, and Jess was gathering her notebooks for dismissal. Suddenly, a loud boom rattled their desks and sent Mr. Daly's coffee mug crashing to the floor. 21 heads turned and stared out the window. They had a perfect view of St. Helens rising up over the ridge. It didn't look peaceful anymore. Pale gray smoke was gushing out of the top. "It's erupting!" Sam cried. Chapter 10. But the loud boom and gush of smoke wasn't an eruption, not a real one. Dr. Morales explained this to them that night when he stopped by the diner. Mom was behind the counter, and Jess and the twins were at a booth, munching on french fries and trying to focus on their homework. Mr. Rowan was working late, and Mrs. Rowan was still with the twins' grandmother. They were happy to see Dr. Morales walk through the door. He had been working on the mountain all day and was heading back to his lab in Seattle. "I had to come by for another piece of that coconut cake," he said. Mom and Jess and the twins joined him in a booth, and he explained what they had seen and heard from their classroom earlier was called a steam explosion. And that's all it was, steam, mixed with a little bit of ash. In a true volcanic eruption, he went on, the smoke is still gray or black, and it lasts for many hours or days. The smoke today had billowed up for just a few minutes and then turned white and disappeared. The mountain had been peaceful ever since. "A steam eruption is like a volcano burp," he said. They all laughed, but Dr. Morales wasn't totally joking. It's another warning sign. Nobody should doubt that St. Helens is wide awake and getting ready to erupt. There were more steam explosions as the week passed. Some lasted for hours. St. Helens was on front-page news every day. Some nights, Dr. Morales was actually on TV news, giving updates along with other scientists who were closely studying the mountain. The twins went bonkers every time Dr. Morales' familiar face popped onto the screen. "There he is! There he is!" they'd shout. But for Jess, it was better to see Dr. Morales in person, and her heart always leaped a little when he appeared at Clive's. He came in once or twice a week, on his way home to or from the mountain. Mom would pile a plate high with his favorite fried chicken or homemade noodles, and between bites of foods and sips of coffee, he'd tell them about his work on the mountain. To Jess and the boys, his stories were like scenes out of a thrilling action movie. A helicopter pilot would fly him up to the top of the volcano, the summit. Those steam explosions had blasted through hundreds of feet of rock and ice. There was now a huge crater on the summit. It was thousands of feet wide and hundreds of feet deep. The helicopter would hover over the summit, and Dr. Morales would hop out. He'd scoop up ash from the crater and gather samples of the gas seeping out. "You actually go into the crater?" Eddie asked in astonishment. "I go to the edge," Dr. Morales said. "I can only stay a few seconds because it's so hot, and I have to get away quickly because a steam explosion happens when I'm there. Well, you'd be toast," Sam said. "Sammy," Mom scolded. But Dr. Morales laughed. "Actually, I'd be boiled," he said, picking up a floppy yellow noodle. "I'd end up looking something like this." Of course, the twins loved that. Sam told the kids at school all about it on the blacktop the next day. Missy looked like she might vomit. But as the weeks passed, Dr. Morales often seemed troubled when he came into the diner. He was still warm and friendly, but he looked weary. Studying an active volcano wasn't all helicopter rides and daredevil stunts. There were endless hours of sitting around and watching for changes. There were nights trying to sleep in a freezing tent with 30-mile-per-hour winds ripping at his sides. And there was the frustration of not having any clear answers. Dr. Morales and the other scientists knew that something was happening inside the volcano. There were many warning signs. That big crater on the summit was growing. There were massive cracks and bulges on the north side of the mountain. But none of the scientists knew for sure what exactly these clues meant. Was the volcano about to erupt? Would the eruption be violent? Would there be a warning? "We just don't know for sure," Dr. Morales said. Meanwhile, the mountain quieted down, and some folks in Cedar started to question whether the mountain was really going to erupt after all. Even some scientists admitted that it was possible that St. Helens could go back to sleep. At Clive's, people grumbled. Loggers were impatient to get back to work. Cabin owners wanted to check their properties. Fishermen were itching to get back to their favorite streams. By the middle of May, the steam explosions had stopped. More and more people were becoming convinced that the danger had passed. On the blacktop, kids got tired of talking about the volcano. Missy even started up about Skeleton Woman again. One day, Jess and the boys were tossing a ball around when Missy came stamping up to Jess. "You know, I never saw the proof." "Proof of what?" Jess said. "Skeleton Woman's shack," she said, crossing her arms. Jess rolled her eyes and the twins groaned. Not this again. Of course, she and the twins had told all the kids about being in the cabin when the earthquake happened. "There was nothing there," Eddie snapped. "But you promised you'd take a picture," Missy said. "She tried," Sam said. Eddie and Sam started bickering with Missy, but Jess was no longer listening, because all she could think of now was Dad's camera. With all the excitement over the mountain, Jess had managed to keep her mind off the fact that she had lost Dad's prized possession. She hadn't even told Mom yet. How could she have been so stupid? Why had she brought Dad's camera into the forest? What would Mom say when she realized it was missing? Tears flooded Jess's eyes. She turned and ran off the blacktop to a quiet spot behind the jungle gym. Sam and Eddie came to find her. "What's wrong?" Sam said. Jess kept her head down so her hair would hide her tears. "That Missy," Eddie fumed. "No," Jess choked, wiping her face. "It's not her. It's my dad's camera. I just can't believe I lost it. My mom is going to be so upset." Dad's camera wasn't just an expensive piece of equipment. It was part of Dad. And now it was lying in the dirt in that leaky cabin. "We'll go find it," Sam said. "We will?" "We will," Eddie said. "How?" Jess said. The twins looked thoughtful. We'll figure out a way, Eddie said. Then he held out his hand. Sam put his on top. Jess hesitated, but then she put her hand on top of Sam's. They leaned together so that their foreheads were touching. All for one, Eddie and Sam chorused. Jess took a breath. And one for all, she answered. And when she felt ready, they walked together back to the blacktop. Kind of see the writing on the wall here. The next morning, Saturday, May 17th, 1980, 10 a.m., Clive's Diner. Their chance to look for the camera came sooner than Jess expected. The very next day, the twins came to Clive's as the Saturday breakfast rush was ending. Hey, gents, Mom called. Your mom went out of town again? How'd you know? Sam asked. She just left. Mom smirked. Magic. Jess laughed. It's because you always wear the same disgusting Mariner t-shirts when your mom isn't here to stop you. The boys looked down at their stained shirts and grinned. The second Mom went back into the kitchen, the boys pounced on Jess with their news. Their dad was heading up to his fishing cabin early tomorrow morning. He'd left his most expensive fishing rod there, and he wanted to bring it home. But how's he going to get there? Jess asked. The cabin was 8 miles from St. Helens. Jess didn't think the police were letting anyone get that close to the mountain. My dad talked to the police chief, Eddie said. The loggers are going back to work on Monday, and the police are even letting people with cabins on Spirit Lake go up there today. Jess was shocked. Spirit Lake was right at the base of St. Helens, much closer than Loomis Lake. Jess paused for a minute thinking about Dr. Morales. She was pretty positive he wouldn't be in favor of people getting close to the mountain. But even he admitted that nobody knew for sure that St. Helens was going to erupt anytime soon. And wouldn't there be some kind of warning before a big eruption? What Jess did know was that here was her chance to get Dad's camera back, and she needed to take it. Your dad will let us come? She asked. The boys nodded. Mom would never approve, but Mom didn't have to know because she wouldn't be home tomorrow. She was leaving early in the morning for Vancouver. The twins' grandma was getting out of the hospital, and Mom wanted to help Mrs. Rowan get her settled. Mom had invited Jess to come along, but Jess said she'd stay with the twins. Jess couldn't believe her luck. Maybe she'd be able to get Dad's camera and sneak it back into Mom's trunk, and Mom would never have to find out that it had been missing. The next morning, when Mom kissed Jess goodbye at 6:30. By 7, Jess and the twins were in the back of Mr. Rowan's pickup, rumbling along Spirit Lake Memorial Highway. There were no police roadblocks, and they made it to Loomis Lake in under an hour. They got out of the truck, and they all stood in the parking lot for a moment, staring up at the mountain. Looks the same as it always does, Mr. Rowan said. It was true. They couldn't see any of the cracks or bulges that Dr. Morales had told them about. The mountain's peak sparkled as usual, and its reflection rippled on the surface of Loomis Lake. I don't want to stay long, Mr. Rowan told them. An hour tops, so don't go far. He had barely started to walk away when Jess and the twins were sprinting toward the forest. Soon, they lost sight of the mountain. The tall trees blocked their view. Not being able to see the mountain made Jess nervous. But what rattled her most was the quiet. She heard none of the usual forest sounds, the chirps of birds and skittering of squirrels and chipmunks. The air was strangely still, without even a breath of wind. The twins were strangely quiet, too. They walked along without their usual baseball chatter. The hike was taking longer than it had the last time. The trail was littered with fallen branches and ripped apart huge holes caused by the earthquake. With every step, Jess's stomach twisted tighter. They should turn around, she thought. They needed to find Mr. Rowan and go home. This all felt wrong. She was ready to grab the twins and drag them back down the trail. But then she saw it, up ahead. The shack. Jess forgot her fear. All she could think of was Dad's camera. She hurried ahead, leaping over branches and holes. She ran up to the shack and pushed the door open. She searched all around the floor, but the camera wasn't there. Her heart sank. She had been sure she would find it lying on the ground. And then she saw her backpack sitting at the table. Strange. She was sure she hadn't left it there, all zipped up. Jess stepped over and unzipped it. And to her amazement, the camera was tucked inside, carefully wrapped in the plastic bag. She lifted it up and removed it from the plastic. It was perfect. The boys came through the door. You found it, Eddie said happily. But Jess's relief was mixed with confusion. How'd it get into the backpack? Jess wondered. I know I dropped it. Someone must have found it, Sam said. Maybe a logger. But nobody's been allowed to come up here, Jess said. And Missy said the loggers were too scared to come to this part of the forest. Maybe she did it, Eddie said. Missy? Jess said. No, Eddie said, raising his eyebrows. You know. You dope, Sam laughed. Skeleton Woman didn't find Jess's camera and put it in the bag. He grabbed Jess. Come on, we need to go. Dad will be waiting for us. Jess put the backpack on and followed the twins out of the cabin. They had just stepped outside when Jess caught a whiff of a nasty smell. The boys smelled it too. Eddie, Sam chided. What did you do? It wasn't me, Eddie said, putting his hands over his face. They looked at Jess. Well, I didn't do it. Oh, Eddie said. It's like rotten eggs. Jess's heart stopped. Isn't that what sulfur gas smells like? She asked. Sulfur gas, like on Mount Pelee. It was one of the warning signs just before Pelee erupted. Is it coming from the mountain? Eddie asked. The horrifying answer came a second later. Kaboom. So there's a picture of it. It's obviously it's an illustration, but that's a perfect place to stop. All right, we'll see you in a little bit.